They say, let your conscience be your guide. This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my very special guest is the founder of the American Meditation Institute, Leonard Perlmutter, also known as Ram Lev. We're going to talk about his new book about the conscience, and it all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio in Southern California, and also my worldwide podcast, Guys Radio, Guys TV. Thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, my favorite portion of the show, and that's when I have a very special guest to bring you some new information. And let's start with a question here. How would you like to learn the key to unlocking unlimited wisdom, and solve life's challenges? So if you're struggling or unhappy with any aspect of your life, chances are you've made choices that were not tuned into your conscience. Leonard Perlmutter, my special guest today, he founded the American Institute in Averill Park, New York, for meditation. Its courses are approved and accredited by the American Medical Association and the American Nurses Association. He's also an author, and he's the editor of Transformation, the Journal of Meditation as Mind, Body, Medicine. His first world-renowned book, The Heart and Science of Yoga, the AMI's empowering self-care program for a happy, healthy, joyful life. He studied in India for years and is a direct disciple of Swami Rama of the Himalayas. His new book that we're going to talk about today is called Your Conscience: The Keys to Unlock Limitless Wisdom and Creativity and Solve All of Life's Challenges. It shows us how to give our conscience sway in our life so all of our decisions support and guide us to act in our highest good. Now, what could be wrong with that? So welcome to Guys Radio, Leonard Perlmutter. Thank you, Leonard.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, Robert. Appreciate it.
Well, let's start right at the beginning with some context for our audience. What exactly is conscience? And with all the rapidly changing technology we have in our lives today, and there's so much noise, why is our often overlooked conscience more important than ever now?
Well, it seems to me from my own experience that even as a young child, I thought, and people that I've spoken with have thought that it seemed as though we have different voices in our mind. And as it turns out, that's exactly true. There really are four separate, distinct voices in our mind. And those are the four functions of the mind. And one of them, which is critically important, is the conscience. And the conscience is a standout among all four because it is the only function of the mind that can discriminate, determine, judge, and decide. Now, when I learned that, it was a game changer, because what it meant was every single choice that I have ever made and every single choice that I will ever make has been and always will be made by the conscience. That's very interesting. Usually we identify, the conscience, that's something about the mind that has an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. No. That's not what it is. It is the only function of the mind that can discriminate, determine, judge, and decide. The three other functions of the mind that I'm sure we'll get to talk about, they are only advisors. They're just counselors for the decision maker of the conscience. But the conscience can make two different kinds of choices depending on how quiet the other functions of the mind will be when the decision-making process takes place. And that is the real challenge, because the other three are loud and they're pushy and they're insistent all the time.
That's amazing. How do you differentiate your take on our conscience versus what a psychologist might say?
Well, Western psychology is only a very, very, very small portion of what the conscience really is. Again, it's beyond morality. It's beyond good and bad, just like Shakespeare said. There's nothing either good or bad, just thinking makes it so. And our thinking is based on our concepts. So perception is based on our conception. So we see what we know. Now, I'm a baseball fan,
Me
and
too. Me
there's a
too.
lovely. Oh yeah, what team are you? What team are you? Do you
Well,
root?
Yankees, of course, but now that I'm out in Southern California and I can walk to Petco Park, so I've adopted the Padres
Well,
as my backup team.
that's good. Well, since a little kid,
You're a
I've
Mets
always been
fan, right?
I'm a Dodger fan.
Oh, okay.
But it's the game, you know. I love the game because baseball is like life. So, uh, an illustration is a conversation that has taken place between three umpires, and they're having dinner and they're talking shop, and the conversation rolls around to what constitutes a ball and what constitutes a strike. And the first umpire, he's a rookie now. He's just up to the bigs
I love
for the
this.
first time in his career, and he says, "I call him as I see him." And the other two nod. Okay, okay. The second umpire, he's been in the big leagues calling balls and strikes for 10 years, and he's shaking his head in the negative, and he says, "No, no, 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 no. I call them as they are," he says. "Oh, I call them as they are." And so the third umpire, now he's an old pro. He's calling balls and strikes now for about 25 years. Looks at the other two, and with firm determination, he says, "They are what I call them." And that's us. They are what I call them. We see what we know. So if our concepts are faulty, which many of them are, it means that we don't make the right decision. And that's the challenge for every human being.
Okay. A lot of the book is about, you talk about the law of karma. Thoughts lead to actions, actions lead to consequences. So for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, how do you define karma? And how much of our paths are filled with karma that are based on our decisions and actions? And then how is it possible to cancel karma that we may have brought into this lifetime from earlier incarnations? I know it's a lot, but that's my little karma multi-question for you.
I look at karma this way. Every relationship that I have is the byproduct of a previous action I've taken that brings about a consequence that places me in a new relationship that provides me the opportunity in the midst of that relationship to self-examine my own mind to determine if there right now in the midst of this relationship there is a faulty concept that interferes with my skillful action. My job in that relationship is to let go of that faulty concept so that I can make the best choice possible. Mm-hmm. So that's what karma is. It is technically from Sanskrit language, it means action, but the action is predicated on a relationship that requires the action, because every relationship shares this in common. If I have a relationship, whether it's with a human being, with an animal, with the environment, it means that I have to take an action. That action could be physical, it could be verbal, or it could be mental, but it is going to be a consequence involved. So I always like to look at the end result and then work my way back to create a philosophy of life. What do I mean by that? Well, I look at the consequence that I want to experience in life. And like I assume most human beings, we all want to be happy. We want to be healthy. We want to be secure. We want loving, nurturing, creative relationships. So the question for me is how are we going to get to point B from point A? And the answer is we need a business plan. But nobody has taught us a business plan or a philosophy of life that, in fact, will allow our thoughts, words, and actions to bring about a consequence where we will experience happiness and security and health. And that's where an understanding of and a coordinating of all four functions of the mind, including the conscience, is so critically important. And it's something that we have never been taught in school. Really, the only thing that we have been taught in school is to memorize and then recite what we memorized. Then the school gives us a degree, and the theory is we can get a better paying job.
I know so well. I've always thought that's absurd, because the students are rewarded for their memorization ability, not as much for critical thinking.
That's right.
So it's a shame, but hopefully the cream rises, but we'll see about that. We learn every day. So the name of the book is Your Conscience, the Key to Unlock Limitless Wisdom and Creativity and Solve All of Life's Challenges. My special guest on Guys Radio, Leonard Perlmutter. He's also known as Ram Lev from his yoga work. And let's get into the core of the book then. You touched on them earlier, Leonard. 4 functions of the mind: unconscious, conscience, 5 senses of logic, manas, and ego. So the body's powered by these 4 functions and guided by our super conscious wisdom. How does this framework that I just laid out there work?
Well, right now it's not working too well. That's why we're in pain. That's why we're in pain. So it tells me that the problem is the mind, and yet the only solution that we have is the mind. So we have to learn how to train and parent the mind. So the first function of the mind I like to talk about is ego. Now, this is not the same kind of definition that you hear in Western psychology, where you think about vanity and somebody's really feels that they're very self-important. No. Ego, it appears to be hardwired to the reptilian brain. Now, the reptilian brain, and therefore the ego, is all about self-preservation. And because the ego is in service to self-preservation, it, just like the reptilian brain, suffers from a tremendous amount of fear of annihilation. You know, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to lose the form. And with that intense fear of annihilation, the ego appears in every single relationship as a color commentator, just like you see on the ball game. And a color commentator, and says, oh, I'm going to split this relationship right in half. Now, this portion is very pleasant. I like it. I think this is good, and I would like to reprise it. On the other hand, over here, we have something that's very unpleasant. I don't like this. I dislike it. I think this is bad. I want to eliminate it. So the ego is always cutting every relationship up into likes and dislikes, pleasant and unpleasant. And we already know from our own limited perspective on this planet, that which appears as pleasant isn't always good for us. And that which is unpleasant isn't always bad for us. So if my conscience, which is the only decision maker, listens all the time to the insistent sales pitch of the ego, I'm going to wind up in a lot of pain. And so we have a lot of pain. Everybody's in a lot of pain. Okay, so that's the ego. Now, I have to admit that the ego is not always wrong. No, you and I, Robert, we need a healthy ego just to have this conversation and make sense to everybody, right?
That's true.
And when the interview is over and we jump in the car or the truck, we need a healthy ego to drive a vehicle, right? So they're not always wrong, but they're often wrong. The ego is often wrong, but it's never in doubt, just like these talking heads on TV, right? Often wrong, but never in doubt. And
perfect.
And because the ego cannot make the choice for the mind, because it's just a counselor, it's just an advisor, it's loud, it's pushy, it's insistent. Okay, so that's the ego. Then we have the logic and senses. Now, the senses are very interesting because our mind projects our creative energy through our eyes, our nostrils, our mouth, our hands, our feet, in a desperate attempt to see or smell or taste or hear or touch some kind of a relationship that will make me happy, that will make me secure, that will bring me health.
Okay.
Here's the problem. The senses, they're a wee bit nearsighted, and they can only see the front of the sense objects, and they're always looking just for pleasant. And even the pleasant appearing things on the front to this nearsighted sense doesn't see the pain on the back. So what happens is the mind becomes addicted to sense gratification. The senses are spending all this creative energy in search of happiness and security and health. And in the process is going on an endless number of wild goose chases after that pot of gold at the end of an infinite number of rainbows. And so it's very analogous to squeezing a tube of toothpaste. If we have a tube of toothpaste in our hand and we squeeze it, certainly the toothpaste is going to come out. But it's going to be virtually impossible, if we need it, to put that toothpaste back into the tube. It's the same with our creative energy. Our minds have become addicted to sense gratification in a desperate attempt to become happy. And once that toothpaste is out of the tube, once our creative energy is spent, we can't get it back. And yet we need that creative energy for many of our duties and responsibilities in life. So what can be done? So again, the senses, they're not always wrong. I love a good meal. I love a fine dessert. I have a body. I have senses. Life is to be enjoyed. But the senses, like the ego, only has a limited perspective. Often wrong, never in doubt. And because it cannot make a decision, only the conscience can. It's loud. It too is pushy and insistent. That's the senses.
So the conscious, now we have the other two, which is the conscious and the unconscious. Touch on those for us, Leonard.
Sure. First, the unconscious. The unconscious is the repository for everything that we deem essential to self-preservation. Okay, so it's sort of a catalog of our merits and demerits. All of these memories that we think are important, some are pleasant, some are unpleasant, and all of those imaginations that we think are important. What if this should happen? What if that should happen? What if neither happens? And so the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind cannot make a choice. So they're sort of like lobbyists for their limited perspective, which is often faulty. Now, the conscience is the only function of the mind that can make a decision. And if the ego, senses, and unconscious mind are so loud and so pushy, it creates a tremendous noise in the mind. And with all that noise, the only thing that the conscience is capable of doing in service to making a choice is to rubber stamp the loudest voice. And that's generally what's happening in the world today. The conscience is making the choice, but it's merely rubber stamping the loud, pushy, insistent voices of the ego, senses, and/or unconscious mind.
So, Leonard, how can we then tap into, you mentioned the superconscious.
Yes.
How can we learn to, because we have so many decisions we make during the day, and this actually rewires our, I'll say brain in quotes. It rewires us to approach life differently, because we have to, as you say, kind of manage and wrangle our brains, because they're going to go into this pattern that's been collectively agreed with and internally agreed with. So we really have to kind of break the mold and and recreate our lives moment to moment with this new paradigm of thinking and decision making and learning to tap into our superconscious. So how do we do it?
We do it by parenting the ego, senses, and unconscious mind. That's the first chore that we have. In every relationship that requires an action, we have to learn to parent and love and train the ego, senses, and unconscious mind to support the superconscious wisdom reflected by the conscience. And if the ego, senses, and unconscious mind can be taught after they present their findings and after they provide their limited perspectives, because we want the ego, senses, and unconscious mind to be received. We want to hear from them. They might be right. But if they could quiet down after presenting their perspective, then in that quietude of the mind, the conscience acts as a mirror, and it can reflect super conscious wisdom from the super conscious portion of the mind. Now, that's not just magic or poetry or metaphor. The super conscious portion of the mind, it's beyond the conscious portion, it's beyond the unconscious portion. It's the same portion of the mind where Albert Einstein saw mathematical equations and where Paul McCartney still hears beautiful melodies. Doesn't mean that we're going to become songwriters or physicists or mathematicians. What it does mean is if we can train and parent our ego, senses, and unconscious mind after they have given their limited perspectives and they can quiet down, then the conscience can reflect superconscious wisdom into our conscious mind to determine our thoughts, words, and deeds. And that will positively affect every single unique relationship that each of us has.
Okay. It seems like, so we're going to be faced with decisions all the time, and there's smaller ones and there's larger ones. And I am trained in hypnosis. And what we would do is to help somebody become a non-smoker or manage their weight or become a better sleeper is kind of after we bring them down and kind of get them into a position to determine, okay, what are the benefits of this habit that you have that might not be that good for you, and let them see that the benefits by not participating in that habit, let's say it's smoking. I wanted to stop smoking 30 years ago when I did, because I went under hypnosis and I said, well, I like to work out. I want to run some marathons. I want to do all the stuff. So basically what I was convinced in a subconscious state was that I have more benefits to gain by becoming a non-smoker than by staying a smoker. And so I went through that process and it clicked in, and I never thought about it. And I don't even mention that word that people do this with. I'm just holding two fingers up to my mouth because there's something that goes in there. I don't even say the word. I don't see them. But for most people, for our day-to-day existence, we're going to come across opportunities and things that are going to tempt us, whether it's fast food or fast car or alcohol or whatever. And they may not have been, hypnotized, or they don't know how to self-hypnotize or manage the process. What can everybody do to kind of manage this process? Of it sounds like what you're saying, Leonard, is that we have to listen to what's going on and the ego and our senses, and then we have to say, thank you, I heard you, and then put them aside, and then allowing in that space the superconscious or the universal consciousness to come in to help guide us. I'll leave it with you at that.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the process is an experiment process. We are asked to make and transform our entire mind, body, sense complex into our personal laboratory for experimenting. We're not asked to just believe. We are asked to experiment, to experience the truth ourselves, because only when we can experience the truth ourselves do we know that it's true, and we know that it's true. And then we own that. And so We must learn how to experiment. And in the experiment process, we must never take on too much too soon. It's going to be too challenging. For example, if I decide sometime in the middle of my life that, gosh, I never worked out, I never really built up my muscles, and now I feel that I need to do that. The last thing I want to do without any kind of experience is to start picking up 100 or 200 pounds. It would hurt me. Okay, but you have a good idea to build some muscles. So start with a couple of pounds. After a week or two, add a couple of more pounds. After a few more weeks, add a little bit more and a little bit more. And within a very short time, you'll be building muscles, you'll be lifting substantial weight, and you won't have injured yourself. So what I say to people, when you begin this experiment process, and it is an experiment process because what we're really talking about is yoga science. This is a science. It's an educational body of knowledge that is the compilation of women and men, countless women and men who have preceded us, who have experimented with their own habits and trained the mind, parented the mind, and used their conscience as their guide. And so when we begin this experiment process, we're asked not to take on too much too soon. And if you have time, I can give a little example of what that experiment process would look like.
That's actually kind of my next question for some examples, because I guess when I was rattling on about the hypnosis, it's really about making the decisions to depend. Like you have two decisions to make. It's you're going to do this or you're going to do that, and if you can have the benefits outweigh the consequences, that seems like a good way to go. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so at least I was.
That's why we want. That's why we want not to take on too much too soon, so that the ego, senses, and unconscious mind will have a pleasant experience to draw upon.
So then what would be some good examples in terms of baby steps that people can take to start to retrain the mind and manage the mind to make the best decisions for them?
Sure. Okay. So let's assume we just had a very nice dinner. And we know that a question then arises after dinner. And what is the question? Are we going to brush our teeth or are we not going to brush our teeth? It's, it's a fairly easy question to ask. And so when I have that kind of a situation, I immediately call a meeting. I call a meeting with the ego, the senses, the unconscious mind, and the conscience, and we rendezvous at the kitchen table. We are all sitting around the kitchen table, right? The five of us. The ego, the senses, the unconscious mind, the conscience, and me. I'm the parent. And so therefore, as the parent, I'm the moderator. And I explained that we just had dinner. Are we going to brush our teeth? Are we not going to brush our teeth? And I want to hear from each of you because I love each of you. You're all part of me. I am part of you. So we want to make the best choice possible. Ego, would you please start and share what your perspective is here on whether or not we're going to brush our teeth? And the ego would stand up and say, I'm against it. It's very unpleasant. I know it's unpleasant. I'm very hesitant to change. And I always equate change in some form with some form of death. So I vote no. Okay, thank you very much. Senses, would you please speak? And the senses gets up and says something to the effect, well, I had a wonderful meal, but the dessert was fabulous. If you remember, we had apple pie. That's my favorite. So insofar as this brushing of the teeth, I'm against it, just like the ego, but I am in favor of a second slice of apple pie. That's what I vote for. Okay, well, thank you, senses. Right? Okay, and now the unconscious mind. What would you like to say? And the unconscious mind gets up and says, head rolling side to side, says, I'm with the other two. I'm with the other two. You know, we often vote in a block. So I usually vote with them. Okay, well, thank you very much, unconscious. Now, I'm going to ask, as your parent and one who loves you, ego, senses, and unconscious mind, let's sit quietly. We've heard what you had to say. We're taking it into account, but we want to hear from the conscience, because in this quietude, the conscience can reflect superconscious wisdom and bring it into our conscious mind so we can go to school on it. Okay, conscience, would you please speak? And so the conscience might say something like, well, I think that we can all agree that this life that we're living is not really a sprint. It's more like a marathon. And for a marathon, we need healthy, strong teeth. We need healthy, strong gums. We need a healthy, strong immune system. And if all of us can just take a time out for 2 minutes, now it's not forever. This is just an experiment. If it doesn't work out, you know, you don't have to commit to it. But if we can just take a time out for 2 minutes, go brush our teeth, then we'll come back to the kitchen table and we'll share what we experienced. And so we all march into the bathroom, we brush the teeth, we come back, and then the parent, me, calls on the ego. What did you experience? And the ego says, I was really surprised, because I generally equate any kind of change that's especially unpleasant with some form of death. But I'm still here. And so, and it wasn't so bad. So it wasn't so bad. That's what I'll say. It wasn't so bad. Okay, well, thank you, ego. Senses, what do you say? Well, I thought too it was going to be really painful, but after we brushed our teeth, something very amazing happened.
Felt pretty good, right?
It felt pretty good. And especially when the tongue was gliding over the front teeth, I didn't feel that mossy feeling, and I disliked that intently. So I thought it was pretty pleasant. Thank you, senses. And unconscious mind, what did you experience? Wasn't so bad. Wasn't so bad. Okay, so what happened? As their parent, I have just provided the ego, senses, and unconscious mind with a sort of a no-brainer, because I knew what the outcome was going to be. I've brushed my teeth before. Yes, a little bit of a challenge, but when you do it, it's very rewarding. So I have just provided a pleasant experience and memory for the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind. And they trust me now more than they did a moment ago. And they trust the conscience more. And they trust that not all change is to be equated with death.
Fantastic. Okay.
And that's a beachhead for me to build on. Not too much too soon. I don't want to give them too much. It'll be another no-brainer. But in the meantime, they're expanding their panorama.
Fantastic. Okay. The name of the book, Your Conscious, The Key to Unlock Limitless Wisdom and Creativity and Solve All of Life's Challenges. Leonard Perlmutter, Ram Lev, is my special guest on Guys Radio. Got a couple more questions. So you break up decisions into the Preya and the Shraya, and make sure that ahimsa, which is the nonviolence, is woven into all of that. So it is a process, but ultimately the decisions become Preya or Shraya. Preya or Shraya. What's the difference there, and what does an audience need to know about that?
Okay, so the Preya. Now, these are the two basic categories from yoga science of every thought. One of two of these is true. The Preya, these are pleasant, they're attractive, they're comfortable, they're familiar. They represent some ego or sense gratification that conflicts with our superconscious wisdom. And the Preya can bring a passing pleasure, but it always leaves pain in its wake. That's the Preya. Pleasant, familiar, attractive, ego or sense gratification that conflicts with our superconscious wisdom. And the other is the Shreya. The Shreya is always in harmony with our super conscious wisdom and will always lead us for our highest and greatest good. So in every moment, we are to serve the Shreya in thought, word, and deed, and will be led for our highest good. And when we have a relationship with the Preya, we don't want to serve it because we'll wind up in pain. We don't want to repress it because we'll become neurotic and we'll be in even more pain. But if we can sacrifice it back to the origin from which it came, the word sacrifice comes from the Latin and then the Italian, sacrifici, to make sacred. So it's just energy. What am I talking about? I'm talking about fear. I'm talking about anger. I'm talking about self-willed desire. If you took a look at anger, for example, anger is just energy. But if I were to ask my hand to produce an angry image, it would be something like this: contractive energy.
Which is a fist that Leonard's making.
Yeah, it's a fist. And so what do I know about energy? In 5th grade, we all learned energy can't be created, energy can't be destroyed, but energy can be transformed. We can transform ice into water and water into steam. Why not transform the contractive and debilitating power of fear and anger and greed? Well, the truth is we can. If in real time we have a relationship with, say, anger. I'm driving to work. Somebody cuts me off in traffic going 90 miles an hour. I have to slam on the brake in order to avoid an accident. And what comes into my conscious mind? Oh, cascades of anger, lots of anger. What am I going to do with it? The more attention I give it, I'm just poisoning my entire body. But if I can sacrifice it back to the origin from which it came, it will automatically be transformed into strategic reserves of healing energy, an increase in my willpower, and an expansion of my access to the superconscious mind, the superconscious wisdom.
Today, in today's world, to succeed in what you're suggesting, which I think is wonderful, people have to be somewhat self-reliant, but also self-aware and circumspect. And that's not easy, particularly now for young people who have grown up in a culture where technology just bombards them with information. And you have institutions like the media and the government are no longer trusted the way they were. And they're sometimes right and they're sometimes wrong, and people don't know where to turn. A perfect example were the elections and then the whole thing with the pandemic. People basically feel like they're on their own. And some of them said, I'm just going to trust the government, or I'm not going to trust them, or I'm going to trust science or pharma or whatever. But people are confused and they're hit rapid fire with information and conflicting information and imagery and a lot of sensory things from the media and just from culture. How can they get started on following this path that you're suggesting, Leonard?
I'll go back to Shakespeare. Above all else, to thine own self be true. We have to become self-reliant. In order to do that, we have to remember something that's critically important. Every thought that comes into our awareness is only a suggestion. It is not an imperial command. Every thought is only a suggestion. And yet, 24/7, if we can parent the ego, senses, and unconscious mind just to quiet down, the conscience can reflect superconscious wisdom to tell us exactly what should be done with this particular thought. Because this thought, if I continue to give it attention, it's going to create a speech. Words are going to come out of my mouth. And with even more attention on that embryo of a thought, I'm going to take a physical action in the world. And all of these actions, whether they're mental or verbal or physical, are going to bring about consequences. that can either lead us to the happiness, the health, and the security that we desire, or will delay the prospect and instead will experience pain.
Fantastic. And towards the latter part of the book, Leonard puts together it's called a beginner's menu of experiments. And maybe this is a good way, Leonard, for some of our listeners who may be millennials, that can start to really reassess how they're living and making decisions, and start with the small stuff. And you lay it out in a very simple way, in some good examples of things that require this thought or that thought and making these decisions. Do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. Let's just hypothetically say that it's evening time. We're watching a little television. We want to relax before we retire for the night. And we're watching TV, and on the TV comes a coffee commercial. And as soon as the coffee commercial comes on, the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind are all ready to run into the kitchen to get a cup of coffee, a little half and half, 2 spoonfuls of sugar, and possibly a second slice of apple pie from leftover from dinner. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
got to get the team together, right, and go through the process of asking
right.
Each one. Okay,
that's right. And the conscience would say something like, "Listen, 10 o'clock at night is not a good time to have a cup of caffeinated coffee. It's going to keep us up. We know that we have a very important meeting at the office tomorrow, and we need our rest so that we'll be fresh." Now, if we had this conversation when we got up at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, should we have a cup of coffee? Should we not have a cup of coffee? I might have a different answer. But right now, I think we all ought to sacrifice this desire, transform it into healing energy, willpower, and creativity, get a good night's sleep so we can make the best presentation tomorrow at work.
Awesome. My special guest on Guys Radio, Leonard Perlmutter, Ram Lev, Your Conscience, the Key to Unlock Limitless Wisdom and Creativity and Solve All of Life's Challenges. It's a new book. Where can people find out more about you, Leonard, all the work you do? And you do a lot of seminars. You have some guided meditations people can tap into online, etc. You want to give your information out now? That's
very nice. Thank you. Yeah, I founded the American Meditation Institute in 1996. Our website is americanmeditation.org, americanmeditation.org. And there is where we let people know about our Yoga Science Foundation course, which has all of this information about how to operate the conscience so that it's optimized, and how to change the software of the mind as well as change the hardware of the brain, as Robert was indicating earlier. And it's very helpful. So americanmeditation.org, and also on the homepage, there's a link to a free guided meditation and conversation, just like Robert and I have just concluded. And it's free. You just click on it, and it will take you to a free guided meditation. And then that's every Sunday from 9:30 to 11 a.m. Eastern time. But then on Monday, you get a free recording that you can use as a guided meditation throughout the week.
That's so fantastic, and I can't wait to do that. So thank you. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And thank you for everything you're doing, because what I love about what you're doing is you're taking very serious subjects and you're presenting them as to, this isn't the end of the world. This is how we can create a new world. And it's important that we do that now. And the exercises you provide people with, and the path, if you will, in terms of how can we create our lives is not, I'm not going to say it's simple, but you give us step-by-step ways where we can get started small, and it's very practical, and you're doing great work. Last question for you, Leonard, and also huge thank you for being on the show, is are you optimistic with all the stuff going on now with the future?
I am optimistic. I believe that there have been these types of challenging times, dark times, at different intervals in human history. And it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. I remember when 9/11 happened and everybody began to go within. I thought that was very positive. But then Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor of New York, within 48 hours, went on national television and said, the coast is clear, go shopping. And that was the end of that contemplative way of thinking. The COVID, you can't get away from it. We haven't been able to get away from it. And many of us have been in quarantine at different times. It has forced us to look for new ways of being. And we now have a golden opportunity to go beyond the rigidity of our past habit patterns. If we can only rely on our own superconscious wisdom, make the conscience our guide rather than, this politician or this aspect of the culture or anything outside of ourselves. Above all else, to thine own self be true.
Perfect way to end our conversation. I thank you, Ramlev, Leonard Perlmutter. It was great meeting you. I enjoyed the book. I love the practicality of your teachings. And I thank you for being on Guys Radio. Hope we can do it again.
Thank you. Yes, I look forward to it.
If you enjoyed the interview and you want to support our efforts to bring you the very best content to help you live your very best life, please subscribe to Guys TV here or subscribe to my podcast, Guys Radio.